As I said earlier, my name is Scott Holznagel. I'm the Customer Love Manager here at Admiral. And today we're going to be talking about 5 engagement tactics to grow revenue and first-party data conversions. What we're going to primarily be discussing is different ways that you can support a revenue and first-party data conversion cycle, something that we like to call publisher revenue ecology. And we're going to talk also about how we optimize that so those things work in symbiosis with one another. We're also going to talk about what those engagement tactics are, how they help you build better revenue, and how they also help you continue to drive first-party data conversions. We're also going to talk a little bit about how creating a content release strategy continues to feed that ecology, and how these things work interdependently. And if we have time at the end, we'll take some time for questions as well. So to begin, what is a revenue ecology and how does it work for publishers? So as you're building a site as a publisher and looking to drive traffic, and you've got a number of different ways that you're doing that, once that traffic is coming in, there's a number of different ways that you're going to want to build revenue with it. Obviously, we all know that a primary driver of revenue is going to be programmatic ads, but there are other ways, especially with the impending death of the third-party cookie, that we need to find additional revenue streams in order to monetize your visitors. So one of the ways that we can do that is to build an interdependent system, particularly on the content release side, but also through engagement tools that continue to drive people back to the site, collect first-party data, make them aware of what content is going on, and eventually, hopefully, move to things like subscriptions or paid models, which ultimately are going to be direct revenue. So we'll talk today about what some of those tactics are and how you build a publisher revenue ecology that is healthy and works interdependently with one another. So the first engagement tactic, which you're probably familiar with if you're familiar with Admiral, some of you may already be clients of ours and working with us already and using our Adblock recovery tool. It's an important one, of course, because it means that it is really the first step in beginning a visitor relationship and introducing someone to your revenue ecology. Most publishers are losing a good bit of ad revenue due to ad blockers. That number is usually between 15 and 30%. So we want to get in front of them and ask them to disable their ad blocker on your site so we can begin recovering some of that revenue. It's fairly easy to implement. In our case, it's one tag. We do most of the design work on our end. Once that's in place, it's immediate and you can begin recovering ad revenue as soon as it's live, which means that you're now getting in front of eyes and getting back some of that 15 to 30% that you have been losing. Another nice part about it is it can be bifurcated so that the CTA allows people to have a choice on how they'd like to support the site. In some cases, it might be a paid subscription, but it doesn't have to be. It can be something like email collection. It can be a newsletter sign up. We can use it to promote an ad-free pass of some kind. The thing here is that's important is choice. There was a study recently in 2018, and 76% of the people who were asked agreed that publishers do have a right to revenue, and many are willing to support them if they have options to do that. In this case, you'll see that Mediaite is referring to having ads pay for your browsing. I think that's a strong call to action because it infers that the ads are actually the ones supporting the site, and by disabling your ad blocker, that will support the content that you enjoy. Just some ideas of how the visitor value comparison looks for people who were already allowing ads on the site versus people who were recovered users. In other words, they saw the CTA and they chose to disable their ad blocker for your site. Recovered users consume as much as 4 times as many page views per session. So ultimately, they are actually more valuable users than people who were already allowing ads and they were visitors on the site already. The The RPM data suggests that recovered users are actually worth about 4 times more per session than users who are already allowing ads. So ultimately, not only are the users 15 to 30% of your ad revenue because they're blocking ads, but those people who did choose to allow ads on the site are actually people who are coming back more often and are more loyal visitors. So their value is actually a good bit higher than people who were already allowing ads on your site. So just one way to begin that process. Another strong tactic is to begin email collection. Now, email collection can be used in a number of different ways, but what we're basically talking about here is just asking people for their email address. It doesn't mean there has to be a necessary intention. You can phrase this in different ways. There's a number of different methods that people use. Newsletters are obviously one. Mailing lists are a little more generalized, but essentially what we're doing here is allowing you to talk directly to your visitors and begin a true first-party relationship. So collecting some first-party data. That can be as simple as an email address, but it can be expanded. We'll actually talk about that here in a moment. But it is the critical first step towards something that is more of a subscription revenue-based model. And it's the next logical step in the ecology process because it's a simple, low-lift option for you to begin collecting first-party data. It doesn't mean that you have to go ahead and build a full newsletter. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily interact with some kind of updates. But of course, that's recommended, and there are simple ways of getting that done. But it's also a good step towards going towards registration walls. That's obviously a little bit of a deeper first-party data relationship. It's also a good way for you to begin ad targeting. But once someone is comfortable with providing their email address, it's usually a fairly easy way to get them to log into a site and have a registration wall where they can be something like a contributor or involved in the site in a deeper way. These can also be expanded, as I mentioned earlier, to collect more first-party data. In this case, this is collecting actually quite a few pieces, but it can be expanded to collect even more. The nice part here is that this is really just a wall to get someone to provide this data in order to get access to part of the site to read something. Your content is valuable. It's not unreasonable to ask for a small value exchange in order to give people access to certain pieces of information. It doesn't necessarily have to be a hard content wall where someone is not able to see it without doing something, but it's certainly something that can be explored or even just intermittently comes up to get people to try to provide this information. The other part that's nice about email collection is that you begin to build a contact list, and that can be used in a variety of different ways. It's something you can send promotions to. You can do things like contests. Newsletters are, of course, an option. We'll talk about those here in a little bit. And then, of course, this is a great list to begin building a potential paid subscriber marketing list. If you do introduce something like that and you've done some work on building an email list, that's the perfect email list to market a paid subscription to later on. To give you some stats on how emails value in terms of the visitors to your site, media and publishing emails actually have the second highest click rate compared to other industries at 4.5%. There's only a small amount of difference between them, those emails, and the #1 industry. So media and publishing emails are obviously having a very high click rate compared to other industries. And only about 5% of publishers measure visitor long-term value. Usually that's in something related to ad revenue. Email collection and other strategies that we'll talk about today move long-term value out of being just related to ad revenue. Something like an email collection tool can give you some idea of, okay, if we are sending this email to this list and we're getting a certain amount of revenue, whether it's because of increased page views, whether it's because of an e-commerce section, whether it's because of a paid subscription or a donation model, it begins to allow you to move out of being solely ad revenue structured for long-term value. Another good engagement tactic that's an excellent follow-up to what we just discussed is newsletters. Newsletters are a really strong way in order to communicate with your visitors, begin to have more one-to-one conversations with them. They can be very basic or incredibly involved, and we'll actually talk about some of the ways that that works and how you can launch something like this. The nice part about the way that we ask for things is it's really just one piece of information, but you can ask for more if you wish. According to a number of different studies, newsletter subscribers may spend as much as 80% more time on site, so that's almost twice as much as a routine visitor. And Adams Publishing saw newsletters increase digital subscriptions by as much as 150% last year. So the nice part about newsletter subscribers is there's a direct relationship to whether or not they're willing to pay for a subscription service. The other nice part about newsletter is it continues to promote re-engagement, both to your new content and also driving repeat traffic back to your site. Ultimately, you want to increase page views, especially from visitors who are going to spend more time on the site. Again, I said earlier that newsletter subscribers are likelier to become and remain paid subscribers. And the nice part about newsletters is it continues to re-engage them. And those folks actually are much more likely to be retained. It's not something that I have detailed out here, but there was a study recently where they determined that people who were receiving regular newsletters and were also paid subscribers were much more likely to remain paid subscribers and continue to renew. We're looking at the Seattle Times newsletter right now. The nice part about theirs is that it guides readers to the best information by letting them know where to look on the site for it. This can be as simple as daily, weekly updates and the top stories in terms of performance or importance. And most people have found that a newsletter that does this, that essentially gives someone an update, here's what's on the site, here's what's new, here's what's important, and here's what we think you should read. It gives them somewhere to go. They may explore from that point on, which is of course great, increasing your session depth, but the nice part is that it continues to re-engage them each day or each week or however long a period you think is appropriate. It also makes it fairly easy to set up because you can make a template like this in most email service providers and continue to just plug and play with the top stories of the day or the week. Speaking of Seattle Times, they actually have as much as 30% open rate on their newsletters and about a 7% click-through rate for their newsletter subscriptions, which are obviously really strong numbers and reflect the power that a newsletter has to continue to re-engage. Another nice part about newsletters is that because the traffic coming from a newsletter click-through is direct, you actually get some opportunities for tracking the session behavior that comes from direct traffic, which of course can be difficult. Another benefit is that you are able to do display ads embedded in newsletters. Usually newsletters that I see from some of the more major publishers actually have quite a few. 2 or 3 is not uncommon. So there's some opportunity to do display ads there. Another point on the consumption differences between newsletter subscribers and regular browsers is that the New York Times newsletter subscribers consume 2 times the amount of content that other visitors do, and they're also twice as likely to become paid subscribers if they already subscribed to the newsletter prior. So again, that makes a point to how creating a newsletter is a step in the process in order to build a true paid subscription service. So it's a simple way to begin to do that. It gives you a strong promotion list and it gives you a continuing engagement tool once they are paid subscribers to make sure that they remain paid subscribers. Another strong engagement tactic that a lot of people are using, of course, for publishing sites and really all sites in general, social media is a big one. If your content strategy is not including some piece of social media release, then it's an easy way to continue to have engagement there and have daily posts. It can be as simple as a new piece of content that you're putting up. You can post those 2 or 3 times a day, and it continues to drive eyes back to the site. Getting something like this started in terms of engagement is very easy. It really just requires a link to your social media pages. In our case, we have the ability to do that with just about any social media that you can think of. Out of the box, we have Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, but it really can be customized to do anything from Pinterest or any of the other social media platforms you might be using. Social media followers are much more likely to convert to paid subscribers. They're very invested. They're also likely to share the content that you have with others, which means that you're continuing to have the opportunity for more traffic coming to your content, more engagement, and the opportunity for unique visitors, because it may not be somebody who was familiar with your brand before, which means that they now are, and they're likely to possibly follow you and share your content elsewhere if they think it's relevant to their interests. Of course, because people do spend a lot of time on social media, and we'll actually talk about some of those figures here in a moment, there are daily opportunities to re-engage visitors, make them aware of your content, drive traffic back to your site, and become a significant part of your content release strategy. It's just another channel for your inbound marketing and another channel for content awareness. So it lets people know what's on the site and why they should come back to it. Speaking of some of the numbers, 95% of people polled recently in 18 to 34 demographic, they will follow companies or brands that they appreciate or that they care about on their social media platform. 1 out of every 5 minutes these days is spent on social media during the time that people are on the internet, and that accounts for about 2.5 hours per day per follower. So that's many opportunities to get in front of those eyes, and it's a pretty big window in terms of being able to drive people back to your content because they see it posted on their social media platform. The last point that I wanted to talk about, which of course is probably the one that I find that most publishers see as most challenging, and this of course is going to be any sort of paid model. In this case, I'm referring to them as subscriptions, donations, or other supporter offerings, and we'll talk about a little bit how that can be tested out in different ways. But I think the reason that this seems challenging is that the idea that a subscription should require exclusive content, access to exclusive parts of the site, certain benefits that are a value exchange that warrants someone to pay for it. I think that challenge is certainly a warranted concern, but I think there are ways to make a subscription program work that don't require so much heavy lifting in terms of content, and we'll talk a little bit about how that will work. Just to talk a little bit about how subscriptions are changing the publishing industry online. In 2020, subscription revenue for publishers grew 16%. I know that number has since increased in 2021, and it's continuing to increase because as we see things moving further away from ad revenue being the primary revenue source, there has to be somewhere that publishers can gather revenue from. Paid subscription models are becoming more and more common. I think we all see them every single day now. And as a result, a recent poll in 2021 from Reuters Institute determined that 21% of adults in the United States pay for at least one US news site, with most of those subscribing to 2 on average. So it means that it's a growing area and it's a growing part of our lives. We're becoming more accustomed to subscribing to a site because we think the information there is valuable. The nice part about subscriptions is that it is less fickle than ad revenue, which means it can be something you can count on a little more, and it can be more consistent. The long-term recurring revenue is also something that you can accurately and reliably predict. So predictable revenue is, of course, going to be important for building your brand. Additionally, you get a greater understanding of visitor behavior, and you're able to collect probably even more detailed first-party data, because part of the process can include things like their address, their phone number, if that's pieces of information you want to collect. And depending on the site, most readers who are willing to subscribe will provide that information. The nice part about subscriptions, and this refers to what I was talking about earlier, is it can be launched without exclusive content. One way to do that is testing donations. Depending on the type of site, you can test out whether or not people would be willing to donate in order to support the site. And really keeping things in that customer identity of being a supporter or a member is a way that you can build tiers that don't necessarily rely on exclusive content. One of the ways that you can do that is marketing specifically to people as supporting the site. You can see here, National Memo is referring to people as supporting members. The nice part about that is they feel like they're buying into a brand that shares their values or is information that they think is important, that it should be out there, or that they value because of its entertainment purpose. That's where you want to key in on them supporting the site, because ultimately your support as a customer will allow us to be able to continue doing what we're doing. As a result, that creates people who are both engaged and monetized, and they're typically quite loyal because they identify as supporters and they're buying into something that they care about. To expand a little bit on what I was saying with regards to supporters as well, is that it's something where you don't have to have some detailed list of benefits that they're getting. It can literally be the benefit of keeping the site up and running, and that's an excellent way to be able to experiment. But you're also able to experiment in lots of other ways when it comes to subscriptions and donations. There's a lot of flexibility. So as your business strategy changes or there are market conditions that change, something we saw a lot of in 2020 was that donations increased substantially. And part of that was because of the situation that we were all in. A lot of sites began to say, this is where you come for this information. We're working hard to be able to update it and give you the most current and correct information. Please consider donating if you think that's important. But that, of course, extends well beyond the pandemic scenario that we've been in. HistoryNet is a good example. They're a very large backlog and archive of historical articles. And because that's the case, they can ask their readers, this is how we keep this updated, and this is how we give you access to so much information. Consider donating to assist us with continuing to do this. There's also a lot of opportunities to upsell those people. So even if they're a donor, that donor list then becomes an opportunity for you to offer a discounted membership or something like that if you do move to a member-based program. And of course, you could do that as simple as an ad-free pass. Instead of collecting ad revenue, if they're willing to pay a few dollars a month to browse ad-free, they can do that. There's a number of different ways that you can move into the exclusive content area, and that's of course more of an investment on your end. However, that is how you get to higher price tiers and things of that nature. In some cases, we're also seeing people provide physical products. So if you're someone who is subscribing for a higher tier or an annual membership or subscription of some kind, that a physical product may be included, which is where you're collecting that first-party data with something like an address and giving them something for what they're doing. A lot of times it's great if you've got that on hand and it's part of something that you're selling already, but it doesn't have to be. You can decide if you want to test something like that out, get a small amount of the physical product and consider it a limited time offer. Those kind of promotions work really well. And of course, ultimately, because someone is paying for the site, that does continue to promote a value exchange. And so that value exchange is a big part of getting them to understand that it does cost money to do what it is that we're doing. There is a lot of work that goes into being a digital publisher, and if you appreciate what we have to offer, then please, continue to support us with monetary involvement in that relationship. Just to talk a little bit about what subscribers are worth with regards to comparing them against ad revenue. A single new subscriber is worth about the same as ad revenue from 30,000 page views monetized through programmatic ads. So that's actually quite a bit. And obviously, if someone is willing to be a subscriber, in some cases, they may have already allowed ads on the site. It doesn't have to be connected to being ad-free. That's entirely up to you. We do see a lot of publishers include an ad-free pass as part of a subscription service, but it doesn't have to be. With regards to recurring revenue, about 75 to 95% of the revenue from a subscription service is due to upsell and renewal. So not a lot of it is coming from acquisition, which means that it's something that you can rely on, particularly if you're continuing to re-engage and offer a good value exchange for what they're subscribing to. Small point on the end here, online donations grew 21% in 2020. That number has actually increased in 2021. Obviously, a lot of that is going to nonprofits, but a portion of that can be attributed to digital publishing. And of course, if people are willing to donate and are donating at that amount, that means that they're willing to pay for things that they think are important and provide a small amount of money to do that. So what does all this mean? Essentially, what we're talking about is how you create a content strategy where the release of your content is coming out in things like newsletters, it's coming out in things like your social media posts, and it's continuing to drive people back to your site. So if I'm posting on Instagram a recent article that I've published on my website, that continues to drive people back to the website. Or I might also include a piece in that post about subscribing to our email list in the link in the profile, which continues to drive email collection on that site, which continues to drive people back to the site. So the idea here is that all of these things are interdependent of one another. You could do just content release on social media in a newsletter, but ideally you're going to want to do both of those things because they continue to be connected with one another. People who subscribe to newsletters and who follow on social media are much more likely to become paid subscribers, and the way that you continue to re-engage those paid subscribers is by posting on social media and releasing newsletters to them that tell them about important content. And ultimately, all these things continue to drive first-party data collection, which is another primary goal of publishers right now. So essentially what we're getting at is to build a healthy publisher revenue ecology. You're going to want to build all of these things, and of course they do take time. The first couple of steps are the easy ones. The subscription model can be slightly more challenging, but it's definitely something that if you can build all of these pieces, it's something that can work in conjunction with one another and build the revenue and continue to drive those first-party data conversion goals that you have. Okay, if there are no questions, I'm going to go ahead and close out here for the day, but here's my contact information, and I will talk for about 30 seconds here so you have some time to take it down. Feel free to give me a call or email me at scott@getadmiral. Again, my name is Scott Holznagel. Anything that you might have that you are interested in discussing more, I'm happy to field those questions or just go into greater detail about what we discussed today. Thanks so much for attending another in the Admiral webinar series. I appreciate the time. Have a great day.